Okay, well, I think let's make a start. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Peter Danchin, the Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development at the Law School. I'd like to warmly welcome each of you to this second in our new webinar series, which, as you know, is a conversation with Larry Gibson. It really is wonderful to see so many alumni on this call. Obviously friends and colleagues of Larry's, but also current and incoming students, staff and faculty, and members of the broader Maryland legal community. I actually believe we have over 120 people signed up for the webinar, and that's really quite remarkable for July 15th. But I suspect it says more about both our interviewer and interviewee today than it does about the timing. This is a new webinar series that we've introduced at the law school, and it's designed to allow members of our faculty to address timely, significant, and other issues, and to speak about their scholarship, clinical work, and research projects. And our hope is that this series will allow alumni and students and the broader community to remain connected and to learn about the rich intellectual life at the law school. Our next event is in 2 weeks. They're every 2 weeks, so July 29th, which unsurprisingly is on the topic of public health in the time of COVID. And that webinar will feature Professors Diane Hoffman, Michael Greenberger, and Trudy Henson. So you'll be receiving more information about that in the coming week. So please join us for that webinar as well after today. But today we really are in for a special treat. Professor Larry Gibson, the Morton and Sophia Mack Professor of Law, truly is someone who does not need an introduction to this audience, but that's not going to stop me. Professor Gibson is one of the most loved, revered, and well-known professors at the law school. He, of course, grew up and has remained deeply connected to Baltimore his whole life, and that's something I'm sure we're going to discuss today. He joined the Maryland faculty from the University of Virginia in 1974. So I believe, Larry, this marks your 46th year of teaching at the law school. And he continues to teach courses in evidence, civil procedure, race and the law, and of course, election law. As many of you know, his landmark biography, Young Thurgood, The Making of a Supreme Court Justice, was published in 2012 and tells the story of Marshall's early years. And again, this is a subject that we're going to speak a bit about today. As you will hear, Professor Gibson is now working on a second book on Thurgood Marshall. And in addition to his career as a law professor, he, of course, has directed state, local, and national political campaigns. He served as a political advisor and campaign consultant to a number of leaders in Africa, including Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the president of Liberia. And of course, he formerly served in the US Department of Justice as Associate Deputy Attorney General during the Carter administration. More recently, Professor Gibson has served as a member of the Baltimore City Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation, again, a subject that I'm sure is going to come up today. Interviewing Professor Gibson, it gives me great pleasure to introduce and to welcome back to the law school, Ms. Rebecca Tabb Simmons. In addition to being a 1987 alumna of the law school, and I learned recipient during her student days of both an American Jurisprudence Award in Constitutional Law and a Cunningham Exceptional Achievement Award for service to the law school. Ms. Simmons has been since 2015 General Counsel for the City Council of Baltimore, the first person to serve in this position. Previously, she has been an assistant city solicitor for the city of Baltimore and has a really remarkable and extensive practice in private practice as well, including as a family advocate representing minors in the Juvenile Court of Baltimore City. So Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for agreeing to do this conversation with Professor Gibson. Before we jump into that conversation, Could I ask you just to say a few words about your current role as General Counsel? What does that role involve exactly, and what are the issues that you're confronting at the moment?
Well, I would say that it's quite a delightful time at the City Council of Baltimore. You have a lot of young legislators who are well educated, passionate about their issues, and I hope that you're following the council, because we have, it's a wonderful time. And I would tell you that as General Counsel, I'm brought in for issues as needed. I give advice as I think it may be needed. A lot of the times they just absolutely are doing what they think is best for the city of Baltimore. And I'm really enjoying watching what's happening for us.
Fantastic. Well, taking you back now in time, I believe you were a research assistant for Professor Gibson, I believe in 1985, just as he was beginning his more intensive research work on the life of Thurgood Marshall and starting to interview his contemporaries. And I believe I learned from Larry that 25 years later, just as the book was about to go to press, you discovered or rediscovered a lost or previously unknown photograph of the young Thurgood Marshall, which of course today is on the cover of that biography. So I wonder, that might be a nice place for us to start the conversation. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that story, and then I'll hand over to you to engage with Professor Gibson.
Well, I tell you, that was my first assignment in the spring of my first year in law school, as working as a research assistant for Professor Gibson. And he just started doing these oral histories of the people who were part of the civil rights movement that were working at the same time that Justice Marshall was. So it was quite a joy to just run behind him and do whatever tasks are required to allow Professor Gibson to do his work. And I would say that I found that Larry Gibson is an extraordinary archivist, all on his own. And while I was charged to do a number of interviews, collect all this data, I wasn't quite as organized as he was. So at the point when I realized I had these very important documents, I was almost scared to share with him that I was still holding on to valuable work that he had been working so diligently on for a number of years. But I just handed the picture over to him, and instead of scolding me, he just was so kind. And he said, thank you, and moved forward. And I really appreciate for the way you are such a great mentor and researcher and just kind at every point. That's what I find there. So, and starting, thank you, Professor Danchin and Professor Gibson, for this honor to have the opportunity to interview you. So,
before you proceed, let me point out to people that she held on to this photograph, which is on the cover of my book, for 25 or 30 years. This is 1985 until my book was about to come out. We had another image that was going to be on the front. And around, I guess it's 2010, so a lot of years, 2010, she says, oh, by the way, you think that the photograph may be useful. And it's the one that's on the image that's on the front of the book of Thurgood as a student at Lincoln University. And that became, because so most of the photographs of Thurgood were in the public domain. And here I had a photograph of young Thurgood that no one had seen, and it's what graces the cover of my book. So thank you for holding on to that many years.
You're welcome. Okay, now, I've worked as one of your many research assistants on several of your projects, including the exhibits on the 50th year celebration marking the desegregation of the University of Maryland School of Law, your exhibit on the first 100 Black lawyers in Maryland, the renaming of the airport to the BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport, and one of my favorites, the permanent installation honoring Enolia P. McMillan at Morgan State University. As you know, these are just a few of your remarkable efforts. And personally, I must say that watching you work makes me feel as if I'm working in slow motion. And I want to be just like you. So the question is, how do you get a project from vision to manifestation? And do you have tips for the rest of us who may be struggling to complete our own epic work?
Well, it's helpful to do things that you like. You're going to be better at it, and you will enjoy it. I've always been fascinated with photography. As a child, it is amazing to me that I could look at an image of an event that had occurred 100 or so years ago. So at the heart of it was this love for photography, and then other kind of graphic presentations of things. And so I've enjoyed cluttering the walls of schools, of colleges. I've pretty much worn out my welcome at Morgan. I've got so much there, and at the law school, I'm getting ready to start working on copy. So one, work on stuff that you like. Secondly, for me, because of to multitask, as you probably know, I constantly make lists of what I have to do. I now use the outline function of Word. But by having a list of all the things that I need to do, it permits me to concentrate on any specific thing at a time, because I'm not worried, well, am I going to forget these other things? And so I found a list making. But that's the micro level. But at the macro level, I've found that it is helpful to have an overarching goal as to life. And I was so fortunate that I was able to coin mine, or with the assistance of a friend, Philip Bach, in a long time ago, in 1972. He, at a time when I was trying to decide whether to move from law practice to teaching, I had this opportunity to go to University of Virginia, and I was trying to decide what to do. I'd been successful as a lawyer, but the new dean of the University of Virginia schools asked what I consider teaching. There'd never been an African-American at the University of Virginia or any non-predominantly Black law school in the South. But in order to decide this, I was discussing it with a friend, Philip Mott, who says, Larry, you can't decide this until you decide, what do you want to do with life? What do you want to be in life? And you have to reduce it to one sentence, which, I started with the normal laundry list of things, but we worked at it for about a month. And I came to the phrase that I wanted to be a just and learned man. Once I had that, it then has guided decisions the rest of my life. It led to the transition from law practice to teaching, to traveling, to lots of other things. So I urge folks to struggle, maybe spend a lot of time at it, reducing it not to a laundry list of things, but at the core, what do you want to be? Now, you may at some point want to revise that, as 10 years ago I did. I kept being presented with things that I would go off and do that weren't precisely on that track. Most of it had to do with running some a campaign for office or helping someone getting into a position. And so I had to rethink it. And there was the most immediate question of, Kurt Schmoke showed up. He was a very successful lawyer, and he was thinking about entering into politics, and he wanted me to help him. And it was going to mess up some plans which I had as to travel and some things I wanted to read. And so I had to say, how does this fit into not being a just and learned person? And I concluded that I really had to amend that and add a piece to it as to not only what that I wanted to do, but what I wanted to be. I mean, not what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, which was to help other just and learned people succeed. So one, have your micro list. Two, it's helpful to have overall arching goal in life.
Excellent. Okay, now switching to a serious matter. The very present matter of police reform is on the conscience of America. This is also personal because we both have sons and grandsons, young Black men. There are cases that hit very hard, and I understand that you were particularly moved by the death of Elijah McCain, a young man who in August of 2019, with no weapon and no police record, encountered 3 police officers in Aurora, Colorado, who threw Elijah to the ground and put him in a carotid hold. Days later, Elijah, at the young age of 23, was declared brain dead. This has got to stop. As you, Professor, we are all racking our brains to find ways to stop these deadly and frightful encounters between police officers and Black men. What, if anything, do you think will help to prevent these atrocities?
I have one very specific matter that needs to be addressed and suggestion. The focus physically lately has been on the chokehold. For at least 10 years, I have been concerned and looking for an opening to try to stop the police practice of forcing people to the ground. They call it the takedown. And in fact, many of the chokehold incidents have been connected with that. It is unnecessary. It is dangerous. It escalates. The Eric Garner incident in New York was all about using the chokehold to take him down, and similarly with this young man. I think a part of the reform should be reducing this common practice. By the way, this is a fairly new, it's about a 20-year-old practice. It was not always the case. It was the other way around. The police showed up, they said, stick them up. But they started this thing of forcing people to lay down on the ground. And what it does is it escalates. People are afraid of the police. A lot of people are very uncomfortable if they're laying on their stomach. They insist people lay on the stomach. Some people can't. And so in the reform, that's my plank in the police form. I've already started working with some state legislators. I've been talking about it a lot. And so there are many things that need to be done, but this police practice of forcing citizens and human beings down to the ground, human beings don't belong laying on the ground, needs to be curtailed.
I'm hoping that'll be exactly what happens. Okay, well, it's widely known that you were a member of the Commission on Historical and Architectural Preservation that recommended the removal of 4 Confederate statues in Baltimore. After a full review, these statues were removed and but intact in August of 2017. In contrast, recently, the Christopher Columbus statue near Little Italy, Baltimore, was unceremoniously knocked down and pushed into the waters of the Inner Harbor. Professor, as you know, there are 2 sides in the debate on whether these historic but controversial statues should remain standing. What do you think of people all over this country who are destroying these statues without prior approval?
I don't support and I condemn lawless, illegal activity. Not only is it to be condemned because it's unlawful, but it's also tactically counterproductive. It casts a bad light on a cause. It reduces the support, therefore. But here's another thing that's really important to keep in mind about mob activity. Mob activity ultimately tends to be turned on minorities, weaker people, vulnerable people, and so we ought to be very careful that we don't condone that. And there's also, maybe this is some degree of cynicism that comes from my early years of practice, and that we must be very careful that these movements don't get controlled and redirected by people who have ulterior motives. In the 70s, I represented a lot of civil rights organizations that call themselves Black nationalists, and I watched how they were infiltrated by agents provocateurs, some of them sent by the government, who would get them to do illegal things or destructive things for the purpose of really being able to destroy these organizations. I was counsel for the Black Panther Party here, and they were systematically picked apart. There was a time, I know I was the lawyer, when about half of the Black Panther Party in Baltimore were police agents. And I noticed in early stages of the Black Lives movement, evidence of right-wing groups that were walking along with the demonstrators and then would throw something, push a policeman, would do something to cause disruption. And
Professor, that may sounds like that's the wrong way to do things, but there are an awful lot of people that feel that this is the time for change to happen regarding monuments being held up to people that have very controversial.
I completely agree with that, that the Confederate monuments, which were put there, not right after the Civil War, but decades after the war as political statements, they were put there as political acts, as intimidating acts of ways in which Confederate sympathizers said to Black people and to other people that you guys may have won the war, but we're going to win the post-war. So they were also there not to preserve history, but to distort history, to give the false impression that the war was not about slavery and that it was about states' rights. So I think they should come down, but that's a different question as to what the process.
Okay. Lot said. Now these are really challenging times, and let's talk about education. Okay, we can all agree that this pandemic is causing students to make tough choices in order to complete their educations. I enjoyed attending law school at the University of Maryland School of Law. It was an excellent choice for me. Of course, I received a great education, and I like the location. It's downtown near many attractions, and all the professional schools are close together. It's also near cultural and sports centers, and only 3 hours from New York City and less than an hour from Washington, D.C. Professor, a lot is said about Baltimore, both good and bad. It's COVID time, but I've seen a lot of development here in Baltimore and people pouring into downtown Baltimore each and every day. So what's the lie? Is Baltimore a great place to be? I think so. What do you think is special about Baltimore, and what is special about our law school?
You know, my best friend Ron Shapiro knows, and others know, that I'm very much a Baltimore chauvinist. I think that it is a very special city that has assets very few cities have. I'm going to read you a list that was produced by Forbes magazine. They put out a list in 2014 of the 15 best waterfront cities in the world. That list included Amsterdam, Venice, Bergen, Sydney, Australia, San Francisco, Cape Town, Hong Kong, Vancouver, San Sebastian, Rio de Janeiro, New Orleans. That was 8 cities in Europe, 1 each in Asia, Africa, Australia, Canada, and I mentioned 2 in the United States, but that was only 14. The 15th city was Baltimore. I have been to every one of those cities except for 3. And Baltimore belongs on that list and near the top of that list, and here's the reason why. It has a unique relationship to the water. there are lots of cities with rivers running through them, cities on the banks of rivers. But I cannot think of another city where the shoreline comes into the city like fingers, and there's these miles of shoreline inside the city. So it has this very special relationship with the water. But there's some other assets. Let's go to the shore. Again, I've been to 75 countries that I can count. I think maybe more, and I'm having difficulty thinking of another city that has this concentration physically of its principal assets. Think of this. Tell me what other city has within 1 square mile a Major League Football stadium, a baseball stadium, its convention center, a world-class aquarium, a science center, its legitimate theater, its convention center, within another mile or so, the B&O Railroad, a world-class museum. We can continue. The legitimate theater. I don't know of a city that has all of this right near its downtown. So we have the shoreline, by the way, only about half of which is developed.
I guess a student would have a lot of fun in Baltimore, but can you speak a little bit about the technological capabilities of the University of Maryland School of Law being able to handle an educational curriculum during these times of COVID?
Well, we're all learning, but fortunately, when we did our new building, a lot of technology was put physically in the building. It's been upgraded, and the students who've been attending our law school have been attending a school kind of on the cutting edge as to the use of technology. I mean, we've got, everybody's learning more, but I think the students here got a good start. The last 3 weeks of this past semester, my classes were online, and I had virtually 100% attendance this semester.
It's hard not to go to school when it's virtual. There's really no excuse for the most part.
That's right. I'll be teaching.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Our time is running short, and I think I'm sure I'm not the only one here who's read and has multiple copies of your award-winning book, Young Thurgood. Can you tell us a little bit about how things are going on your current book? And I'm wondering, and I bet you know nothing of it, if you've ever had writer's block, and if so, what do you do to get past it?
The first book covered Thurgood Marshall up to the age of 30 in 1938. And in 1938 is the year that he becomes the lead attorney for NAACP at the national level. The book that I'm now writing goes from 1938 to 1954. The heavy part of it is in the 40s. I'm having fun writing it, but I'm at the third go around because I changed my mind twice as to how to structure this book. I started writing it, picking up in 1938, and assuming that it would proceed in chronological order, which is the way biographies typically proceed. It was coming along, but it just didn't have the right kind of zing. Then I said, now let me arrange this topically. He's got his famous voting rights cases, then there are the housing matters, there are the university matters, transportation, and that would have been a great book for lawyers, and I spent maybe a year going down that track. Finally, I decided about 2 years ago on my current approach, and I'm having fun doing it. The book is arranged geographically. The period of time is 1938 to 54, but the first chapter is all about Thurgood Marshall in Texas. Then the next one is Virginia. Then I go to Florida. At the moment, my mind is in Tennessee. Now, what that geographical approach has done is forced me to learn the individual states. Instead of thinking of the South, Tennessee is certainly very different from Virginia, etc. I've had to learn the geography, the demography of the individual states. So the individual states themselves become characters in the book. And Thurgood had to understand that. He had to arrange the relationships and what matters he would address on a state-by-state basis. So the answer is that's what I'm doing now. Yes, all writers have time when they're going well, and there are times when you feel like writing. There are the times when you feel like reading and engaging in research. But I'm having fun with this. As I said, my mind is, as the last month, has been in Tennessee. I just left Oklahoma, and I can't wait to get to Louisiana. That's the next state that I'm going to address. But I'm so fascinated with Tennessee that it's time to. And I have to move on. But that's this book. It is Thurgood Marshall from 1938 to 54. But in a sense, it's a travel log. Oh,
when can we expect to read that book? When is your publication date or about?
Sometimes next year.
Okay, that's good enough. I'm sure we'll see it because you complete that which you start. It's quite impressive. So, Professor Danchin?
When I'm going to get to Mississippi. Mississippi is about 3 states away. I will get to Mississippi because Thurgood had a special thoughts about Mississippi. So yes, there will be a chapter about Thurgood Marshall in Mississippi. Karen.
Terrific, terrific. Well, thank you both. There's so many rich issues here for us to discuss and to ask you questions about. So we're going to transition now into the Q&A period of the webinar. We have about 25 minutes, and what we find works best in this format is using the chat function. So if you do have a question, which I'm sure many people do, please put it into the chat function, and I will moderate the question and answer, and we can pose questions to either Professor Gibson or Ms. Simmons as we go along. So while people are thinking of their questions, Larry, I'll take the chair's prerogative and ask you the first question. Given all your work on Thurgood Marshall and digging into his early life and interviews with his contemporaries and so on, what is something about Thurgood Marshall that people should know that they might not otherwise know?
Well, part of what I've done is sort of dispel some notions. First of all, let's just again repeat that Thurgood Marshall did not apply to the University of Maryland School of Law. He would have been rejected, but there's so many websites and things that say that he tried to get it straight and repeatedly. Then there are other things that about him. There is this diplomacy. We think of him as a litigator. He was a very effective, very good litigator, but a part of what I hope to bring out is how much he got done through negotiations with the executive branch of government. Not everything was going on in the courts. And so that's a dimension I hope to cover.
That's great. Thank you. So I have a question here from Ellen Calgary, which I think is a great question actually for both of you. What should our next mayor do first to help our beloved city of Baltimore?
I am absolutely excited to look forward to. This is going to be the first time in the history of the city when all 3 top officials of the city will be African-American men. So brothers, it's time to stop. That's the first thing that I have to say. It's on us now. But I don't have a specific agenda. I have a more general agenda. I've listed some of the assets of Baltimore earlier, and there are others. And as a result of this, we have the problem of just thousands of people who enter the city daily, benefit from the city's resources daily, and at the end of the day, go back out of Baltimore, sometimes bad-mouthing Baltimore as they go out. And we must, all Baltimoreans, including this mayor, must continue to press to see that the rest of the state does a better job of supporting the city that they rely so much upon, and in which there is such a concentration of the infrastructure of what matters in this state. As I said, this is where almost all of the important cultural assets, the museums are, the theaters, etc. And so the mayor of Baltimore and leaders of Baltimore must continue to press for adequate support to the city by folks who benefit, who use the city every day, but don't pay property taxes in the city.
Perfect.
I would say that I'm on the staff of Brandon Scott. He's city council president, soon to be Mayor Scott. And to find out what he will do, you can just simply follow his social media feeds. He's particularly interested in having every law and everything done by Baltimore City to be viewed with an equity lens so that there would be fairness. He cares deeply about ending gun violence. He wants police reform, and Baltimore, as you know, is under consent decree order, has done a lot in that to make that go forward. And he has a full agenda, and I tell you, they work tirelessly for Baltimore. And I think we're going to be in for a lot of really wonderful things, and it's going to happen very quickly, from what I can see.
Fantastic, fantastic. So Larry, we have one question about a very difficult exam you gave in 1980, but we'll skip over that.
When I had my book opening, there at that time, Governor O'Malley, he said, "Can you change my grade?" Mayor Rawlins Blake also spoke. She says, this is my book launch, 600 people there. Can you take another look at my grade? The statute of limitations has run on these grades.
That's very funny. Well, we have two questions from colleagues, actually. One from Professor Tanya Banks, asking, when we look at Marshall's early litigation in the southern states, did he find one state worse or better than the others in terms of race? And Mark Graber, Professor Graber asks as well whether you've got to Virginia yet in your new book, and what is distinctive about Virginia. So those two questions.
Okay, first of all, yes. I mean, we all know that that he had the special success in South Carolina because of Judge Waddy's work. My book, that's the last chapter of my book, because everything comes together there. First of all, the opposition, those who did not want change, were better organized, they were smarter, their approaches to the opposition was just forceful. So it required special efforts there. I mean, after Marshall wins the white primary case in Texas on the grounds that this was state action, the South Carolinians go back and comb their legislature and remove every word of every provision dealing with the primary elections, trying to avoid Smith versus Allwright. But there was Judge Waddy's Waring, who on voting rights matters, on school matters, on a variety of matters. So I end the book with South Carolina. Virginia was sort of up south. And what it turns out that he did not have to do a lot in Virginia after the early 40s because his classmate, there was Spotswood Robinson and Oliver Hill, his classmate Oliver Hill, they became the Thurgood Marshalls of Virginia. And so they consulted with him, but there was one time at which Oliver Hill had 75 civil rights cases pending in the federal courts of Virginia. I'm not sure what the federal court, the courts of Virginia. I think it was federal courts. So yes, his early cases were the teacher pay cases, and his most successful case that he then used around the country, a place called Austin in Norfolk, was in Virginia, but he was able to turn Virginia over to Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson.
Terrific. There's an interesting question here, Larry, about the Civil Rights Acts. You were practicing when the Civil Rights Acts were passed on a bipartisan basis with a Southerner as president. Given our current deeply polarized environment, do you foresee any legislative openings or possibilities to enhance the rights of minorities in the current moment?
Well, I certainly very much remember the '64 Civil Rights Act because as it was being considered and being reimbursed, I was at Howard University, and I was the chairman of something called the DC Students for Civil Rights. This involves students from 8 universities in the Washington area who lobbied and did other things to push for the legislation. You know, in my office in the law school, I have a flyer from a student filibuster that we conducted. And so the passage of the '64 Civil Rights Act was really important. Then the Housing Act. When I got out of law school, the first 2 years after the clerkship, Ron Shapiro and I brought lots of litigation around using the fair housing statute. So statutes are important. I think statutes will be, more will be enacted. We've gotten kind of a focus on judicial activity, but we must continue to press for a legislation. And I think that after this election, lots of possibilities will open up.
Terrific, terrific. There's a question here about the students at the law school. Your legacy includes helping to increase and maintain the number of African-American students at Maryland Law School. And you've had some success on this. What can we do to help you make certain that we maintain diversity levels at Maryland?
Well, let's get back a little bit of history. When I was admitted to law practice, we were averaging 2 new Black lawyers per year. My year was a big year because we had 3. But we had none the year before and only 1 the year after. So we were still, during that period, averaging about 2 Black lawyers a year. It was Paul Smith, myself, another man named Kurt Smothers in 1967. And Kurt went into the military, so it was really only 2 new practicing lawyers. And so a priority of mine when I changed from from Virginia to Maryland was to see that our law school did what it could to address this imbalance. And for about 10 years, the University of Maryland was a national leader, in maybe even the national leader. Now, fortunately, many other law schools have come around and are doing a much better job, but we have to be constantly vigilant. Some of the numbers I've been seeing lately says that we can't lose a sight of the necessity to continue to press. The facts with respect to women. Let me just give you just a little bit of more information there. The first practicing lawyer by an African-American woman in the state of Maryland was Juanita Jackson Mitchell in 1950. 2 years later, there's Lena Lee in 1952. Another 10 years passed before the next Black woman was admitted to practice, a woman named Baker in 1962. She was in bad health and she died soon thereafter. It was another 10 years before 1972, before we get the next Black lawyers, Roberta Gill, a woman by the name of Joan Sessoms. And so, but after that, sisters got busy in the 80s and the 90s. And so, I mean, now my concern is African-American men. That's what needs special attention right now, but that's not a law school, just a law school phenomena. That's a phenomena nationwide that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. Rebecca, did you want to add anything on that issue? Or?
Well, I would just say that that this may be a special time in history where there's really no going back. I mean, with social media, the internet is providing information on what has really happened in this country. And it's time for all of us to take our lessons, understand the history, and we are going to continue to need more and more professionals, Black professionals, to be part of this discourse to help this country move forward. Because one race cannot do it alone. And I'm using that as a generalization to say the terms Black and white. These are just icons for our history. So I'm happy that the University of Maryland School of Law has been on the forefront of making sure there's been diversity. And this is not the time to stop it, because there would be a major void if we don't have all the voices that are available to help us to get through this time in history in the best way. So I'm hoping on every front, we continue to keep this dialogue open and to continue to do that which is right.
Thank you, thank you. Well, and there are, just so people are aware, major initiatives now underway and building on prior work on issues of racial injustice and inequality at the school in both our clinical programs and our research programs. So this work is ongoing, obviously. Larry, just one question for students. You are famous for your civil rights tour of Baltimore, which goes to various locations around the city and often to places that were the centerpiece of civil rights cases at different times. Why should students go on your tour? What is it that they can learn from going on your tour around Baltimore?
I am just so glad I was able to get it in this year just before the pandemic occurred. It is my view of the history of Baltimore, and we cover key places where specific things happen. But I also try to give the students a sense of the demographic movement of groups of people in Baltimore. And I expect to continue to do it. I do it in February. I have been, have for many years. And it's Larry Gibson's view of Baltimore. And I know the city because of being involved so much in political campaigns. You really have to know the turf, mainly because you need to figure out what kind of sign goes there. Is it a lawn sign? Is it a porch sign? Is it a window sign? So you really need to know where everybody is and how the houses are organized. So I talk a little bit about that as we move along also, but it is a city that has it has a fascinating history, and it has these historical gems that are around. Many of them that having nothing to do with race or nothing to do with African Americans. This is a city with just a lot of history in it. That's one reason why I've been delighted to be for 8 years on the city's Commission on Historical and Architectural Preservation. I was for a long time on the Maryland Historical Trust, making sure that we preserve and don't get torn down things that are an important part of our important part of our history.
So if I could just ask you a follow-up on that, when I think of your work and your legacy at the law school, the one theme that runs through all of it is the question of history. And even in your photography, I always get a sense that you're capturing moments in history. One of the great concerns many of us have about legal education today is that students don't necessarily study enough legal history or have a strong enough sense of the contextual historical background to many legal problems. So in your teaching, how do you bring the historical perspective and how do you bring the history alive for your law students?
You're absolutely right. My two seminars, Race and the Law, the Maryland Experience, and the one on Thurgood Marshall and some others which I've taught, that problem that you've just addressed is what I try to address, to get people, students, to understand how much there is around in archives, in historical societies, in the recollections of people. The courses are precisely about that, addressing legal history and getting people to ask, well, the case is Hadley versus Baxendale, but who was Hadley? Who was Baxendale? Who was Jones v. Smith? The people that were involved in the case, the lawyers, the judges. You're absolutely right. We don't spend enough. And that is why for about the last 10 years, I've moved almost entirely in that direction, except for the election law case course. But even that has a historical component to it. I teach the current issues, but I also try to get students to understand the history and to go beyond what they simply can find by Googling, and to get into, in my race courses, I take them to the city archives, to the Maryland Historical Society, to the Pratt Library, if possible to some people's houses and around the city, because we have now put, I think, too much emphasis on just what you can gather by clicking something into a keyboard.
Fantastic.
I'd just like to add that I would say Professor Gibson's class is a destination in Maryland.
Absolutely, I think that's exactly right.
There's one something on the history. You may know that in the basement of the law school are my papers. I should save this down because who knows, I could drop dead tomorrow. I've kept everything, and most of my material is in a room in the basement of the Thurgood Marshall Library. The last count, it was 2,500 loose leaf binders. There's probably now over 3,000 loose leaf binders, focused mainly from 1968 forward. Thousands upon thousands of photographs and papers and other matters. And so I don't know what's going to happen with all of that stuff, but I've kept it all. And there are many people here. I have many photographs of folks that I'm watching that are on this program, or papers or anything. I never throw away anything.
Professor, don't you have the entire archive from the Afro-American newspaper?
Oh yes, I have lots of things from the not the entire archive. The entire archive, the main archives, are at Morgan State. But I have lots of materials. What I have, well, I have lots of different subsets of archives. About 10 years ago, when the NAACP was celebrating its 100th anniversary, I found that the Baltimore branch had not kept their materials well. So a whole seminar of my students, we spent one semester organizing the archives of the NAACP. Now, and we, in exchange for that, some of the materials came to the University of Maryland. So there's a fairly large collection material about the Baltimore branch of the NAACP. and lots of other matters. And of course, you've previously mentioned my particular interest in the history of African American lawyers.
We definitely need to have this conversation further. Professor Gibson, there's one question. Is another Black alumni reunion in the works?
They're every 5 years. They come along. 18. How many years is what's 5 years from 2018? That's when the next one will be. Whether I'm going to be around for it, we don't know. But anyway, but whether I'm here or not, I hope there will be. It's this would be the 5th one, and so what's that? 2023. So we'll see. I'm no spring chicken.
I'll see you there. You'll be there.
Wondering, I'm 78 years old, so in 2020. But anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Fantastic. Well, there are many comments in the chat, which hopefully you can have a look at, just thanking you both for this tremendously rich hour in conversation. And one from Judge Andre Davis saying, Professor Gibson, you are our treasure, which I think is an appropriate note to
Your Honor, that's a pleasure. That is a pleasure. We hit the law school with a storm. I remember, I want to say, who's that master? He just took over the law school. And yep.
Well, it really has been a tremendous conversation. And on behalf of everyone who's attended today, thank you. So Rebecca, thank you very much as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all of you guys and people, women, and folks who joined in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. And look out again for our next webinar on July 29th. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Larry. Great to see everybody.
Thank you.